Take two.
Take two. We're really hopeful that this is gonna work. Um, but TBD.
Yes, TBD. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about health anxiety or health OCD part 2 with compulsions.
Yes, that is correct. We are going to be doing that, and I think it shall be excellent.
I hope so. That's the hope.
Shoot, I totally oversold us.
Fingers crossed.
I'm so sorry about the Niners, Kelley.
Yeah, it's devastating.
Yeah,
I may have
yeah,
cried a little bit.
like a little bit. Yeah.
A tear
Shed a tear or two for
or
Purdy.
5.
Oh,
Yeah, it's fine.
yeah.
Next year.
Next year. For anyone from another country, yesterday was the Super Bowl. That's what we're talking about. One of the teams is Kelley's team. But anyway, we digress. We're here to talk about health anxiety and or health OCD, depending on what you want to call it.
Yeah.
And last week we talked, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about obsessions. And here today we are going to be talking about compulsions. And I guess with that said, where shall we begin?
Well, I think maybe let's list some of the common compulsions that we might see with this. And I think we alluded to it last time we were talking about obsessions, is that some of the obsessions we would almost say like can be a compulsion, or like we try to describe them as such. So if you're doing like, oh, how do I feel, right? It's so automatic. And then checking, right? It's like a split second between the two things.
Yes.
But the intrusive thought being, well, how do I feel? The compulsion being, I don't know, let's find out.
Right.
Is a really fast experience. But
yes, it is really quick.
They are separate.
Yes.
But treating it almost like an intrusive thought. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point that the compulsion happens sometimes so quickly that it seems almost automatic. That being said, to your point, they are different. But sometimes, in fact, I'd say most of the time, you're not going to catch the compulsion until after you performed it.
Yeah.
So, so essentially once you see, oh, okay, I've checked my feeling, it's really, what are we going to do from there?
Yeah. How are we going to judge that? Now, how are we going to compute it in our brain and go like beep boop up? This equals bad
danger, Will
cancer.
Robinson.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair point, is like the compulsion happens, but then it's either sometimes, as we say in all of the subtypes, the compulsions are retriggering, right? So basically what happens is you go checking, you go on an expedition internally to see like, oh, okay, how do I feel? Yeah, I'm looking into my private experiences to see how I feel physically and whether or not, my throat hurts and I might have throat cancer, right? And then I do check my throat, hoping that it's not going to hurt. And oh no, there's a little weird scratch there, right? And so effectively what you've done is, instead of reassuring yourself, which was the aim of the compulsion, the initial compulsion, you end up retriggering yourself. And from there, we get to maybe jump on whether or not you continue to perform compulsions, trying to figure out what was obtained in that fact-finding mission that you went on. And so just being like, oh, okay, yeah, like there's a scratchiness in my throat. I don't know what that means, and I'm going to accept that, right? That's ultimately response prevention, but and that's for the next episode. But yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that there's a tendency, right, for compulsions to be automatic and to seem out of our control, and it's okay. It's okay.
It is okay, as long as we're able to kind of catch it and then come back.
That's right. That's right. So no matter where you are in the process, if you've started down the road of trying to resolve uncertainty, just bring it on home.
It's never too late.
It's never too late.
Yeah. Come on back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one compulsion. Another one might be Google, right? Searching, which is interesting because Google triggers the crap out of everybody. it's either you're, it's again, it's going back to what you just said, is like the compulsion can then re-trigger you.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, Google says you're dying or you're fine. Or
There's
it's like,
never any in between.
yeah,
Never.
it's never,
Yeah.
never.
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting. It's like, okay, so if you Google all these symptoms, like let's say tingling sensation in left arm,
Mm.
could be like a pinched nerve, right? Could be you're having a heart attack or a stroke.
Right.
All those things are now listed on Google. Could be nothing.
Right.
But I mean, whew, if you're anxious and you're looking for certainty, you're probably going to go with the worst possible answer, because catastrophe is what we do best.
Right. Right. And the feelings are most intense around the scariest thing. And so it's
Yes.
like, oh my gosh, well, what
See,
does
I
that
knew
mean?
it. I
Yeah.
knew it.
I knew it.
Here
I
we go.
knew. Yeah. It means that my spinal column is being impinged upon
Yeah.
and I'm going to
Yeah.
die.
Yeah.
Like, right. Like
Yeah.
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 And that's
Yeah.
confirmation bias. I think actually, not that that's necessarily about compulsions per se, but I think maybe helping people to understand our brain's tendency, which is that when we have this bias, when we have this idea of how things are, for instance, if I presume that there's something deeply wrong with me in terms of my health.
There is.
Oh, yeah. Well, exactly.
I thought you were just going to say something wrong with me. I was
Well, there's many things wrong with me, but yeah,
Same.
no, legit. Um, so yeah, so you're like, what's wrong with me? And you're going to start looking in your environment for things that confirm the bias that you have, right? You have this bias that there's something wrong with you. So you're going to be scanning, right? And all of a sudden it's like, you're going to find evidence that there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
So true. It's the way I describe it recently. It's like your brain's just scanning for threats. It's like scanning.
Yep.
Where's this is a potential threat.
Exactly.
It's just
Found it.
going, yeah,
Found
there it is.
There it is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not worried about murdering your family anymore. You're worried about dying.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Don't get too alarmed when it jumps.
Yes. Because that's what anxiety does.
Yeah.
It's like,
Loves to
oh,
find the
that's
new
not
scan of items.
exactly. That's not
What's on the docket today? Well, cancer.
cancer's on the docket today.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Actually, it's really funny. I saw Laura from OCD Doodles posted
Oh.
something today, and it was something like basically like a panel of different types of OCD.
Oh, that's probably so good. I have to see it.
Yeah. And it's like, meeting is adjourned, but don't go too far. And then the next slide's like, we'll be back in 0.1 seconds. So,
yeah. And I think that's important to recognize, is that just because we've resisted the compulsion doesn't mean that it'll just now simmer down.
yeah,
Simmer down.
it doesn't care
It
to
doesn't.
simmer down. It's not
No.
interested in that.
It will come right back. So it's just remember that. Don't get disheartened here. This is a process.
It is a process for sure. But we digress. We were talking specifically about compulsions in this subtype, and we were talking a lot about the physiological sensations that you might find yourself sort of checking internally.
Yeah.
Google also, which again, nobody's friend, because it's going to probably tell you that there's some chance that you're dying, which here's the rub, so to speak.
There it is.
There is a chance, right?
There is.
Yeah. It's and that's where OCD anxiety always gets its traction, is on those chances. Like,
Yes.
it's a possibility that you are dying or that you have something that's undiagnosed. The question is there sufficient evidence to suggest that we should go down a rabbit hole trying to resolve that uncertainty? Because it's possible that the sun's not going to rise tomorrow, but I'm not going to spend the rest of the day trying to make sure that it does, or make sure that I know for sure whether or not it will.
Right, but also with this one, it's like, well, but it's much more likely that someone gets cancer, right? And that's
Fair.
the reality,
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean we need to live like, "I have cancer," or "I'm going to get cancer," because that's not there's no evidence that suggests that. It's just if the doctor tells us we're good, we kinda have to go with that.
that's right. That's right.
And, I mean, we'll talk about that more on the response prevention and the third part of all of this series.
Yep.
But tune in next time for that one. But
Tune in next time. Um, so Google, what else?
reassurance from others. So it might be asking people, hey, have you ever had this? What do you think about this? Taking pictures of certain things like, oh, does this look like skin cancer? Or,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Um,
going to
so
multiple
like I was gonna
doctors.
say,
Yeah.
so people with health anxiety fall into one of two categories. They might go to see a lot of doctors. They might avoid doctors entirely. And one way or another, that it becomes problematic, right? Because generally speaking, we do want to see doctors in the course of our lives. But if you're constantly going to the doctor and constantly asking the same questions over and over again, first of all, it's going to put stress on your bank account, right? Like that's a lot to keep going in your
Time, big
time.
time.
It's also going to put stress on the relationship between you and the doctor. Like you're not going to
Oh, yeah.
be. And what's unfortunate too is that sometimes doctors, actually, this is really important to highlight. Um, Sometimes doctors, if they know that you have anxiety, may sort of write you off,
Oh,
which
that pisses me off.
really pisses me off too. That being said, I also understand it from the boy who cried wolf perspective. Like
Sure.
if you've called in 50 times, they are going to be less likely to take
Totally.
you seriously. Unfortunately, it's true because
But you're talking about the people who they have an anxiety disorder that's diagnosed on their charts.
bingo.
A person just comes in for a regular and they're like, "Ooh, but you have anxiety." So, and maybe there's a real issue, but they're
Yep.
not gonna hear you out.
Right, which that's crap. It sucks, and is not okay.
Yeah.
So, I think also the tricky thing about navigating this particular subtype is that there are gonna be issues that come up with your health in the course of being a human, and so you are gonna need to address things. The answer here is, like, again, don't ever go to a doctor or go to a doctor every single day of your life. It's somewhere in between and making choices based on what is reasonable, right?
Yeah.
Not um, what is what your fear is suggesting that you
Right.
do. Um, and I do see we've got a fair amount of people chiming in. Thank you so much for chiming in. We do try to keep things sort of on topic, so that when people come back to reference these episodes, um, there's some rhyme or reason, but we will definitely try to field some once we finish talking about the different types of compulsions as they pertain to this particular theme.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, but speaking of that compulsion, I think another one could definitely be like the clarification, like,
Mm,
"Oh, did they hear me right? Did I need to clarify a little bit more? I didn't maybe give them all the symptoms correctly."
yep. Yep. And I think that that's people will do that with their therapists as well. Like, well, but I didn't give you all of the information, as
Oh, yeah.
though their therapist is going to, like, the job is to tell them with certainty that they don't have a health issue, which of course
Right.
nobody can do that, including your therapist. So that's a really tricky one. I'm so glad that you brought that up and helping people to see, like, oh, right. Like, me calling back right now because I'm like, "Ooh, but I didn't say this small part of the information. Maybe that changes everything."
Right, right, right.
That
Totally.
can be really problematic as well.
Yeah. It's really about accepting uncertainty, unfortunately, and that's a scary thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a scary thing. Um, and it's a totally freeing thing if you've been caught up in it for a long time.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It
Yeah.
is.
Um, All right, so yeah, calling back to make sure that they heard you just right, that they didn't miss some important piece of information is definitely a piece of that. Um, what about just other than like checking physically? What about just reviewing information in your mind over and over again?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, even just comparing, "Oh, how did I feel last week compared to now?" Or
Right? Right. And wait, when the last time I looked up what the symptoms of whatever disorder were, what did it say again? Did it say I'm gonna look it up again, right? And that may play into wanting
yeah,
to go back and re-Google things. Um, or you just may spin about it like, oh right, but it said this, it's fine, right? And
yeah,
then
yeah,
put it to
yeah,
bed momentarily and then you pick it up again.
right.
Yeah,
And and there's so much that can go on in here. There's so many additions, like adding onto a car, like, package. It could be, like, screenshotting the Google and referring to that later or
right. Yeah, actually, it's interesting. It's a little bit off topic, but I did see a question come through that kind of tangentially relates, which
Okay.
somebody was saying it's not actually a question, but somebody said dash cam for driving OCD, and I think that kind of relates to what you just said
Yeah.
about taking a screenshot to reference later. The reality is, and we can't give direct advice on here, nor do we know somebody's direct circumstances, but generally speaking, trying to pour over some sort of a record, of
Yeah.
some experience is probably being done in order to make sure that something bad didn't happen, which is really just likely to feed into the cycle.
And mistrust of self, right? Like, then you start questioning your own reality of, like, "I can't trust my own eyes, so let me use the dash cam to record it, or let me take screenshots so then I can review it over and over and over again to be sure, or have someone else
Right.
review," which absolutely happens. It's compound interest, like, it just grows and grows and grows. There's no end
No,
here.
no, it's going to keep asking for more and more and more. Um, and I've seen this with people in door locks. Like I'm gonna take a picture of the door in the locked position so
Or a
that when I
video.
or a video of me locking the door, or turning off the light, or turning off the curling iron, or whatever the thing is.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so that can be a really tricky one,
yeah,
and keeping that in mind is important.
right.
Um, so yeah, all sorts of ways that we can compulse in this arena,
Yeah,
that we can try to get certainty about the status of our health. But ultimately, as Kelly said, and as I think I said earlier too, like we just don't, we can't know for sure. Right? There's
can't
an,
know.
yeah, there's always something that's going to be like, hmm. Um, So, anything else on this front that you think it's important that we touch on in terms of specific compulsions within this subtype? Somebody just said compulsions can smartphones can make compulsions easier, which is absolutely true.
Yes,
It's
it's
like
so true.
carrying around a library with you gosh, can you
Yeah.
imagine health anxiety before WebMD or Google?
Yeah, I don't yeah,
Just
crazy.
totally different world, right? Like lots more.
So much more material now that's readily available,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
everyone's an expert, and everyone's self-diagnosing, and access to charts too. Maybe that's another important piece is, like,
Ooh,
um, because now you have to get your what I forget what the
like a
new
portal.
yeah, the portal, I think, like, they have to actually legally show you things within a certain time frame and
Mm.
have your chart notes available to you within a certain anyways, if you have, like, blood work coming in, people will be, like, checking, refresh, refresh, refresh.
Yeah, and then when it comes in, it's
What
matched
does
with yeah,
that mean?
and then we go to Google,
Yeah, and
and then
then
Google says you're dying.
yeah, yep,
Oh, what a mess. What a mess.
but we
Yeah,
have to, as hard as it is, and, there's a lot of bad doctors out there,
yeah,
unfortunately, just like there's bad therapists. It's just you have to let them do their job, and if you, and we can talk about this next time, is like second opinions and whether it's a whole nother thing to navigate. But if you don't feel comfortable with your doctor and you don't trust them,
That's reasonable, and you don't
yeah,
just have to stop looking
yeah.
because yes, absolutely.
I mean, I know you and I both have dealt with difficult doctors, and
Yeah,
we're like, we just don't like the way we're being treated.
right.
But that wasn't health anxiety related.
No,
So
no, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think that oh, no, I was gonna say something, but I lost it. Any
that's
case.
okay. Maybe because yeah,
Yeah.
there's something wrong with you. I told you.
Oh, well, for sure. Here we go. There's if I had health anxiety about my memory, I'd be like, well, maybe this is the first sign. And maybe it is, right? Like that's the sad thing is like maybe it is, but it also might not be. And there's not at this point sufficient evidence for me to take that thought seriously, right?
Yeah.
Like if I forget something in the midstream of thought once a day, it's just not an indicator enough. Now, if it was, 50 times a day and I couldn't find my way home, then yeah, maybe we go and look into that a little bit more. Um, I think that's what I was going to say is that ultimately, and again, you're right, it will be more next time. But as a preview, I think it's down to what's reasonable,
Yeah.
right? If a doctor is not listening to your concerns, is being super dismissive, um, or you've only had one opinion and it's something that's going to require like I had back surgery a couple years ago and I went for a second opinion, right? Like I did
Yeah, it's your back.
because it's my back and I wanted to get some clarity before I had somebody cut me open. Um
I
but
should
yeah.
I should have done the second opinion on my heart surgery. But I didn't, but I'm more on the avoidance side. So,
Well, and that's
anyways,
well, but the thing is sometimes you don't or sometimes you do and like it's not inherently bad, I think either way, right?
no,
Like
yeah.
uh, but I also think it's totally reasonable to want a second opinion.
I do
So
too.
it
I do
doesn't
too.
necessarily mean that you're being compulsive or that you shouldn't do it. And I think people want a really clear like rule book as to well what's compulsive and what's not. And the reality is that recovery requires us to be flexible about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Um, David was saying we can also use our phones for ERP, which is such a good reframe
Yeah,
and totally true.
totally. So
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. And I actually like, we'll talk again more about that next time. But yeah, I really love using our phone reminders as a way to trigger ourselves so that we can learn how to navigate triggers better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, any other thoughts before we wrap this up?
Um, no, I think that's about it.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, like I said, a lot of the questions weren't necessarily specifically related to the subtype. Not that we want to sort of not answer. Um, can I throw one out real quick?
Sure.
Because I that one's kind of could be related. How helpful do you think thought labeling is? Like, oh, that's an OCD thought, and I don't need to listen to it. Oh,
I think that's dangerous territory.
I would agree.
I think that gives us reassurance. I think it's important to be like thinking,
Yes.
feeling, but as a generality, like we don't need to say like, oh, you don't need to listen to that because that's not accepting uncertainty, is it? That's saying this is just OCD. It's
Right.
definitely not the other thing. And we're
Right.
saying, well, truly, maybe it could be, but based on what the evidence we have right now and what other people the doctor has told us, that's what we have to go off of. And of course, they could be missing something.
Yes, but I totally agree with you. Generally speaking, when working with somebody, it's like there's a huge difference between saying this is a thought versus oh this is an OCD thought, which is really intended to partition it as like I'm safe, I don't have to worry about that versus saying which is only going to turn into a rebound. It's going to make you want to keep engaging, right?
Yeah.
Whereas saying, it's a thought and thoughts can be fact or fiction, I don't know.
And I think early on with some people, if they're really fused with their thoughts and, very low insight, sometimes that helps with just identifying what is the thoughts sound like, but always with the preface of like, this is just to do that. We're going to not do that in like a week.
Right. Right.
And that's with very few people.
It's a bridge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a bridge. It's like,
Yeah.
let's just bring awareness
Yeah. And ultimately,
to scary thoughts.
exactly. Ultimately, mindfulness would have us do that all the time anyway, right?
Yes.
Just labeling the thoughts and not necessarily responding to them immediately. So,
Yeah.
um, when there's nothing urgent, like immediate, like in your path that needs to be addressed, like, oh, my foot is on fire. I'm
Yeah,
not
that's
going to
what
just
we
sit
mean
there.
by urgent.
Yeah.
It's life and death. It's
Like,
like, don't walk into the sidewalk because there's literally a car that's going 90 right now,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
nothing else is urgent.
No, no.
So,
Um, well, thank you so much for all who joined. We look forward
yeah,
to talking more next time, which will be in 2 weeks, about compulsion or about ERP in the context of recovery from this subtype. And then in 4 weeks, we're going to have Michael Steer and Josh Spitalnik on to talk about their book,
yeah,
which they just came out with. And we look forward to that as well. So
very
stay
much
tuned.
so.
All right. Have a good one.
Okay. Take care, everyone.